I mean, almost all professional tennis players use the time between the serve, for a recharge routine. The tennis association only allows 20 seconds between two serves, the maximum 20 seconds. Usually they have some movement, squeeze the ball, throw it up, but always the same. And the moment they do that, I mean, a movie goes on in their head, and it really resets them. So, and this is another thing that comes from neuro-linguistic programming that I got into then and saw, wow, I mean, there are methods there that have been used also by special forces, very, very effectively, because we know that mental rehearsal is almost as effective as physical rehearsal. If you have mental routines, you can recharge extremely quickly, and get yourself back into a state, without getting affected, by whatever happened before that, and then perform in that state.
Klaus, I want to start with a story that I know is maybe probably a defining story for you, but something that really stuck out from me was your story about watching the moon landing when you were a really young boy, and I thought that would be a great place to start this conversation. Will you tell me that story?
I'd be happy to tell you that story. As you've read the book, so you know that I have to frame it a little bit. I mean, my parents were refugees from East Germany, so they were the ones who fled. And my father died when I was 10, and my mother, in an increasing fashion, then went back to work, and in an increasing fashion sent me back to our relatives to spend my vacation time there. And it so happened that this was also a vacation around the time when the moon landing happened. And obviously, everybody was super excited about it. You have to know that in East Germany, it was forbidden to watch West TV, but most people had an antenna sitting somewhere that they could direct towards the West and still receive it in a bad, bad way. But the other problem was that timing was not made for the time zone in the northern European hemisphere, So it was late at night or early in the morning, from what I recall. And we set I was with my aunt and uncle in a small town between Berlin and Hamburg, And so we set our clock, woke up at the time when it was supposed to happen, and the first thing we did, we closed all the curtains before we switched the TV on, changed the antenna. And then the first thing, it was black and white TV. So before you saw any image, you saw a lot of snow. And then slowly something like an image appeared, and it was Western TV. So we stayed on and looked at it. And it was, I still get chills as I'm thinking back of it, because it was amazing, and on the one hand, because it showed what mankind is capable of doing, and outer space travel was amazing in general, and then stepping foot onto another planet was amazing. But I think it was more looking at this from a perspective of a split Germany. This was a moment that sent more to all of us. We were enthusiastic and said, this is hope that maybe one day we can all be reunited. And it actually told us the strength of the West, hopefully one day prevailing, and we all had tears in our eyes, and we're very, very excited after this.
I mean, how incredible to think back on, seeing that as a 10-year-old from inside a communist country, hiding the fact that you were watching the moon landing from secret police, and now, at the other end of an incredible career, looking back at everything that you've done. I wonder, before we get into some of the kind of the tactics, if you could just give us like a snapshot of, where you are now. We've seen a look at the humble beginnings. But what's the top of the mountain?
Well, you want me to give a little snapshot of all the things that happened. I mean, and where I'm now. I mean, so I mean, born and raised in Germany, studied in Germany, started in consulting, then went into the pharmaceutical industry in Switzerland, then started a 20-year career at Siemens, worked in all kinds of businesses there, had a great opportunity, ran Siemens USA as the largest region at one time, and then became Siemens CEO. Decided at a certain point in time to leave and go back to the US, and I became the CEO of Alcoa, did this for 10 years and split Alcoa into Alcoa and Arconic. And after that, I really wanted to go on and do, after having done so many years in public companies and being in this quarterly cycle, I thought I'd do something very different, which I did. Then the call came from Saudi Arabia to look at a very exciting project, which is now called NEOM. At that time, it didn't even have a name. I became the first CEO and built the team, we found a new CEO, built a strategy, and then moved on. So today my life basically falls into three big chapters. One is we formed a family company, which is a cooperation with one of the dominant probiotics companies in the world called Allergosan. The product is called Omnibiotic. It's a super great line of products of professional probiotics. So we have that as a family company here for the US. And the second bucket is actively investing through my investment company K2 Elevation into typically tech companies. I'm very strongly interested in software as well as healthcare, and robotics, automation. So, and then the third bucket is advisory, including, working for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I'm on the NEOM board also and doing some other things there, as well as working in the field of educating or helping CEOs and leaders all around the world, which is very exciting.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're on both a personal level and now at a very scaled level with this book, sort of giving back all the lessons that you've learned, climbing to such kind of great heights. Before we get deeper into the book, more context setting, it seems you've been very private throughout your career, despite, and maybe that's part of like being, the CEO of public companies. But what made you want to sort of embody your wisdom into this book and publish this at this moment in your life?
Well, first of all, when you run large organizations, you just don't have time. You just don't have time even to sit down. You are occupied, and then there's this brutal force of every quarter, boom, boom, boom. The clock resets. So you literally you can't even think of this. So I used to be a complete fan of time management and only realized relatively late that it's not about managing time, it's about managing energy. And then the journey starts. It's always the question that puts you onto the journey. And then the journey starts. And what does that mean even? What does energy mean? Where does it come from? Okay, the first thing that comes to mind is, yes, you have to stay fit, sleep, drink, blah, blah, blah. That's very well understood. But then you say, what other energy sources are there? And then you realize, it goes back to body, mind, and soul. What does that mean? And you go back to practices and then the question comes, okay, once you get the energy, it burns off. In the morning you start fresh, and then the evening you are tired. How does that cycle work? How do you use the dynamics of energy? How do you build resilience? And then one thing that I realized is this very odd concept of purpose. I've been struggling with this for a long, long time, and I wanted to get my hands around it because I realized it is so important. I somehow had sorted some of it out, but I didn't have enough of the time to look into the foundations, and purpose is one of those concepts that has been around as a question as long as mankind exists almost, So I wanted to dig into this myself, and I said, okay, well, let me write this down. And when I realized that, I said, but then there's also this, what I call this part that I just described, this, I call this the inner game. But I said the thing that most business books talk about has nothing to do with that. It only deals with what I call the outer game. It deals with how do you build a vision, how do you manage competitive advantages, how do you run large projects, how do you select the top team, how do you build the team, how do you manage your board. But I said, there's a lot learning around that too, and how to become an effective leader. But in truth, the second part, the outer game, has to be fueled by strength of the inner game. And so in a way, if you don't know how to work to have energy, you will not have enough to focus on whatever you want. And then this aspect comes, okay, are we just made this whole work-life balance discussion that I always felt uneasy about, because for me, it was always one. I mean, I never would have stayed in a job that I wouldn't have liked. And I mean, my thought was always, you love it, change it, or leave it. In this whole generation of young startup leaders, who push themselves to the absolute limit, I've seen quite a number of people who broke down already in their mid-30s, literally physically broke down. And I thought, this is so sad that we allow this to happen. And that all of this together made me think, okay, Klaus, it's time now. I'm going to put it together, and I have to admit, one other thought also was to memorize it for my two daughters who are both in business. I mean, and work very, very well. And I'm very proud of what they do.
I love that. I think sometimes the best books come out of a very personal desire to teach just one person or just your children. It really brings out a sense of honesty and earnestness in authors that readers feel and love. So I love this focus on energy rather than time. And you said that this was like a relatively late epiphany for you. So I want to go back to that moment. Like, where did you learn this?
I was actually here in New York running Siemens USA at that time, and I always had the great pleasure that I worked with people who I really liked and had great respect for, and in most cases, I think it was mutual. So one of these individuals came in at late at night, peeked his face into my office, and the door was always open, and said, "Hey, Klaus, I have news for you. You've been wrong." And and I said, "Wrong? What? I've been wrong on many things." And he said, "Well, you've always followed the wrong guidance. I know that you've been pushing us for time management, but in truth of the matter, it's managing energy." And at that time, I said, "What the hell do you mean?" And we sat down, and I obviously was ready to defend my position, because I thought this was so well thought through. And I realized very quickly that he was right. He was right. And I had to learn. And learn I did.
And what was the journey sort of unpacking? As you mentioned, there's the sort of the first obvious notion, which is, oh well, I need to take care of my body so that it's healthy. But I feel like you've gone so far in unpacking all the different sources of energy, and I imagine that was quite a journey.
Yeah, it continues. The journey continues, because the journey is never over. Happy to talk about that. You always learn something. And no, I think what then happened is, after I was reflecting on it, actually, I've noticed another phenomenon. I love playing tennis. I don't play it very well. I wish I could play it better, but I love it. I really love it. And I realized that when you looked at the tennis world, there was a time when there were great tennis players who just burned out. Agassi is one example. He just moved up, boom, burned out, and then somehow they came back. So I started looking at what happened there, and I realized that there was a big movement in the whole professional athletes, that they were realizing a lot of this is a mind game. A lot of this is not solved just with more physical practice, but you also had to look at the holistic self. And the optimization function, which I liked as a CEO or as a business leader, is performance. So it was not this happiness, or health or whatever. It was what I needed most, and most leaders need. How do you get performance? How do you stay on top? How do you energize people at a time when you theoretically are very tired? How do you do that? So that got me onto this journey, and I looked into tennis and found this gentleman, Jim Lur, was one of the foundational people, who was at that time working at Bollettieri tennis camp, and wrote books like Mental Toughness for Tennis, and so this was what started that journey. And I thought, wow, why is this not better understood, and that got me into this, and then you learn the tricks of the trade. And the question then is, I mean, okay, what does that, what one other thing is, I mean, I always thought there's a lot of fundamental misbeliefs when you start with time. I always somehow assumed that there's equidistance in the relaxation, from how much time you use to exert it to how much time you need to recharge it, until I realized that's not the case. There are ways how you can recharge very, very quickly. Again, tennis was my learning there, because what you see today, I mean, almost all professional tennis players use the time between the serve, for a recharge routine. They have trained a recharge routine, that allows them. There's the tennis association only allows 20 seconds between two serves. The maximum 20 seconds that they usually they have some movement, squeeze the ball, throw it up, but always the same. And the moment they do that, I mean, a movie goes on in their head, and it really resets them. So, and this is another thing that comes from neurolinguistic programming that I got into then and saw, wow, I mean, there are methods there that have been used also by special forces, very, very effectively, because we know that mental rehearsal is almost as effective as physical rehearsal. So if you have mental routines, you can recharge extremely quickly, and get yourself back into a state, without getting affected, by whatever happened before that, and then perform in that state. So that was all part of the journey.
That's incredible. And that I feel like goes to, I think you outlined a few different sources of energy, physical, mental, certainly. You addressed there.
Emotional, physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can chop it up in different ways, but that's the way I
Yeah.
chopped it up in.
I want to ask if there's, the tennis example is such a good one, in noticing the asymmetry between how quickly you can charge up. So how did you maybe, really tactically, how do you adopt that into your practice, into your leadership ability? I mean, are you in a meeting, like running a 10-second meditation when somebody pisses you off?
I have not found anybody yet who says that they run a meditation, other than probably in Japan, where they close their eyes sometimes for hours in conversation that you don't know what exactly they are doing, whether they are sleeping away, whether they are listening very carefully, or whether they are doing a mental routine. But normally in a Western style conversation, you are supposed to have your eyes open, and be attentive. So not a meditation, but I mean, one of the other things that I realized, that all of these things have actually one thing in common. And the one thing that they have in common is breathing. Breathing is so foundational for the physical as well as the mental and emotional stillness, or attention level, So, and that is something that I took on relatively early because I had actually learned it already at university, but didn't translate it. I had learned autogenous training at that time, which I liked a lot. Which is kind of an old method on the 1910s of self-hypnosis, as a relaxation strategy. But that takes time, and you can't do it in a meeting. But when you see what you can do with just controlling your breathing and letting a breath go in, go out, and just doing it, and nobody actually notices that, you can take charge, you can take control of your own emotions relatively easily, be focused again. And I have been using that for, I would say, I mean, decades now, decades.
Yeah. And being able to, I imagine, even in some of these incredible rooms that you're in with some of the, other most powerful and most experienced leaders of either your company or countries, if you're able to maintain that command of your body and your mind, and you're just not let panic rise, not let emotions drive decisions, having that deep keel in that moment must have been a source of advantage or um, success, like many times over. I would think. Has that been your experience?
Uh, I sure do. I sure do. And the least that it does is it allows you to not be drawn into emotions that somebody else wants to impose on you. So you are. In the end, I always say, and that's one of the big ahas that many people take away, that they don't realize that you are fully in control of your own emotions. Because I mean, they say, "Oh, this person pissed me off, made me angry," So, and in truth of the matter, it's a trigger that somebody throws at you, but you also can have the capability to not take the trigger, to just say, fine, that's your problem, not mine. You can continue to try to drag me on here, but I'm not following your lead. I'm following my own guidance, so you don't have control over me. And that's actually easier done with a little practice. That's easier done than one would think.
How do you practice that?
You just have to get into many situations where you are challenged, So, but I don't know. I didn't practice it in front of a mirror or anything like this. No, I practice it. I practice it every day, and fortunately or unfortunately, I had enough situations, more than enough situations, many, many more than enough situations.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the spiritual energy. I
Yeah.
think that one is maybe the least obvious to people, and gets back a little bit to what you mentioned earlier as something that we all wrestle with as purpose. Is the spiritual energy associated with the purpose that's motivating the work that you're choosing to do?
Yes and no. Look. I mean, the way let's start with a simple one like purpose, simpler one like purpose. Purpose is a very. I always thought it's a very opaque concept, and now, having had the time to dig into it, what I call the ride through space and time, because I started, I mean, with all the ancient religions, and then went through what the philosophers, major philosophers said, and looked into more recent views. And what I concluded is, number one, there is no one purpose. There are some philosophies that basically say, yes, you should as an individual follow this. Yeah, I mean, if you believe in that, then you should. So, but it's not that you must. So you have a choice. So and the question is, do you only have one purpose, or do you have multiple purposes? I think most people probably don't just have one purpose. They have multiple purposes, because you also have multiple hats, multiple roles. You are potentially a father. You might be the son or the daughter of someone. You might not be. You are. So they might still be alive. And your parents. You might have to take care of your parents. You might run a company. You might work for something else, and those things, you might have different things. That you want to achieve and that you get excited by. And also it changes over time, because you go through different phases in life. You reach some of those purposes. But the most important thing is about having a purpose, is because some people, because they feel it's so complicated, I can't commit to one, they don't realize you can change it. If you are not happy with it, you can change it tomorrow, today, now, if you're not happy with it. But what purpose does is something amazing. It is like what light is, what is happening with light when it's concentrated through a laser. Light by itself, now we have the light coming in here from the side, from the sun setting in New York, so it's diffuse, as you can see, but if it were a laser, it would basically bring the building down, so, and that's what purpose does to energy. If energy is diffuse, yes, it's great to have it. You can attach it to anything. But if you have a purpose, if you say, this is what I want to do, then the energy gets concentrated and literally goes through walls, and you get motivated. It drives you. It gives you more energy. So that's on the purpose side. On the spiritual energy is one source of energy. Yeah, I mean, it's spiritual energy is one thing that almost not nobody talks about in business, and I get it because it's a personal decision. At the same time, when you talk about energy as a driver of performance, it is important to raise it because it is the the source that potentially, if you have a belief in a greater being that could be with you all the time. And I mean, I'm a strong believer, and I describe in the book what led me to this, So, and for me, I mean, I very strongly believe in the creator. You can attach all kind of names to it, whatever you believe in there, It's in the end, it's the same, So, but for me, it's like a radio station. I always say it's a 24/7 radio station that's always on. And whenever you want to listen into it and you need it, to recharge, it's there. You tune in. And the cool thing about this radio station, it has a dial-in function. It has a 1-800 number, and you can talk to it. You can talk to it. And in a way, I mean, you get the feeling it talks back, for those who have had dark times, real dark times, you know what I'm talking about, and for the others, I hope you will not need it, So, but when you need it, if you need it, it is a great source to have. It's a great source to have, and to not have it will deprive you of something. That's my belief. And again, and the other question is, well, what if, what if there is no creator, I say, well, I don't know. But then the question is, would I be worse off or better off if I wouldn't believe? And the answer to that I give myself is I'm better off believing in it. Okay, and one day I might find there is none. So what's the big deal? I have definitely not lost on this. And yeah, I always tell the story. I think it was one of the Nobel laureates, who had I think a ski house or so, and above the door was a horseshoe, and one of the colleagues visits him and comes in and says, "Hey, what is this? You have a horseshoe hanging over your door. Do you really believe in superstition?" And he says, "No, obviously not. But I hear it also helps if you don't." Yeah. So that's that obviously is the scientific way to approach this. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a similar approach with the spirituality, the physical health, the mental health. Um, Whereas whether you start with focusing on trying to optimize performance, or whether you start with what is best for your personal health, you sort of end up in the same place. When you look through the lens of energy, and I'm curious to sort of go back to like this epiphany, and as you managed and learned all these new ways to sort of build up and regenerate your own energy, how did you see that sort of manifest itself in your performance? Was there a sort of an inflection point in your life?
I wouldn't. I mean, I wouldn't call it one step function, but as so many times in life, it's not the answers, but the questions you ask, that drive your life, And with this reframing on going away from time management, does all this question of 15 minutes meeting, bam, 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 you now you say, okay, we still manage the calendar, but before I go into a meeting, I have to manage myself and my energy,
Hmm.
So I go into the meeting, I know what I want, I am energized, because as a leader, in the end, you have to energize others. If you go in there and you are burned out, you are in a bad mood, you can't expect to get the best performance of yourself and of the team. Impossible, really. So this is the reframing. And then the moment you look at it, you suddenly realize, okay, I got very angry in this meeting. And the team basically tells me later, Klaus, why did you get this angry? We also thought it was crap, and we got it already with your first remark. You wouldn't have had to waste another 20 minutes on going after this and killing a dead horse already 15 times after this. So because and why did I do that? I didn't do that consciously. I was getting so mad with the situation that I had to get myself over it, and to then learn, hey, you know what? Don't even start to get mad. You realize situation is bad. You point it out. You say, I expect this and this and this and this to happen going forward. In the end, you are the leader, and if you feel that the issue is not fixable by that team, you have to make a change with that team. You know, or if you feel like the team has to get a little bit better guidance, you guide the team. What's the thing here? So there's no point of getting emotionally charged. If you feel they are not getting it by your simple message, yeah, you may have to dial it up once, and but then calm down again and say, look, and now let's move on. Let's move on to the next one. So it has I think very strongly influenced my behavior and certainly made my life much better.
How often do you see, you're in very unique rooms with very unique people, heads of state, other Fortune 500 CEOs, executive leaders from a wide variety of, how often do you see that group really have like a strong command over the things that you're talking about? I'm struck by sort of the difference between like you being in these very very rarefied rooms and still feeling like this book really needed to be written because what you were seeing still sort of shocked you. And
Well, I mean, when you're together with in a group of likes, it's a very different dynamic. Um, so I can't. You rarely see CEOs, other CEOs, then in their own environment how they deal with that. But the one thing I can tell you, and this was a motivation for me to write it, is listening, dealing with CEOs. And trying to guide them along and seeing what they are struggling with, and one of the issues is not just in the business world, but also in life, because we didn't even talk about that. I mean, one of the things is, I mean, if you have no energy left for your family, then what? And a lot of people basically think, oh, I'm now in the CEO role. I mean, by the way, the tenure in CEO roles has gone substantially down over the last years, So that's the other dichotomy. I mean, when you look at professional sports, it goes up. I mean, the Roger Federers, Rafael Nadal's, and Novak Djokovic, all of these folks, I mean, are retiring at a much later age. That would have been impossible 10 years ago. Whereas you see on the CEO side, I mean, if they stay in the role for 3 years, it's already long, which also wasn't the case before. And then very often when you look at what happens to them afterwards, they struggle. They struggle and how do they define themselves, And when you then look at some who are in it for longer, I mean, it's not rare that you hear a divorce, that they don't talk to their children anymore and stuff like that. So, or they're struggling with how do I balance this? And I recently had an experience which was quite fascinating. I was talking to a very, very successful young CEO of a publicly traded company, and it was super. I mean, a real Superman, and at the end of that session, I said, "Well, let me ask you a question. How happy are you on a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being the best?" And he started and he said, "In business, I am." And I said, "No, no, 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 stop. I want to know how happy are you in life, And And he goes again in business. I said, no, well, sorry. I mean, no, I see one person. You are one person sitting in front of me. You lead one life. One day it starts, one day it's over. I'm asking you, how happy are you in your life? You know, and then we continue to talk. In the evening, we sit and have dinner together, and a friend of his is also there, and he says, "Hey, and the friend says, hey, how was the day?" And he said, "Well, it was very good, very challenging." And the friend says, "Well, challenging. Tell me more." And he said, "Well, Klaus challenged me today." And okay. I mean, the friend says, "How did Klaus challenge you?" And he said, he forced me to realize that I can't distinguish between my happiness in business and in life, that it has to be one thing, and I am one. And I thought, and we all laughed about this, because it is something that needs no pointing out. We all know this. So at the same time, our industrial mindset has been almost brainwashed so much, that we feel forced, that we distinguish between the business world and the personal world, until one day the life takes over and it ends it, and then the distinction it disappears. And that's why I think it's really important, that people understand how to manage your energy, and also how you use it then, to have a successful and fulfilled life for long, and success in performance in business, and a great performance in life, and these things go together, in my view.
Yeah, I think that's an important part of the probably the context for this whole conversation that I should have added earlier. Like, not only have you achieved these wonderful things in the professional world, but also married, kids, a successful family life, and physical health, despite a really heavy burden on the work side of things. And in the conversations I've had about with friends about you and your book and your message, that's the thing that people are most curious about. So how do you balance those things? How do you manage your energy for life and work and family?
Well, I mean, you just have to try to have as much as possible, and then uh, make a decision on how best to use it. And I think that, I mean, one of the things also is, again, to the point that I said earlier, that it doesn't have to be equidistant. I mean, I was all the time traveling. I was gone a lot when my children grew up. But as you correctly said, I have a great relationship to them, great relationship to them. And it was not a function of me having been around that much. It was more a function of what I did at the times when I was with them. So it required a certain discipline that, for instance, when I was there, that I took the cell phone away and listened to them. And had conversations with them. We had a practice, or I had a practice, that I created what I called special moments, that are memorable, that we did something, and that we did something real, and don't think of it like glorious things. It could well be, I mean, when the kids were younger, we lived close to a place that had a nice basketball court just around the corner. And just to take the basketball and go out and play a little round with them, and just be out in the open, or go for a long walk and have a conversation with them, those are, and where they realize you are there for them, you are interested in them, you have a dialogue. I think that's the most important thing. Creating these special moments worked well for me.
Are there any other micro habits that come to mind for you that are frequent?
Yeah, I mean, I work out religiously every morning. Religiously every morning. So my office knows that. I mean that wherever I am, I need to get a workout in, and the workout is, again, a wide variety. I mean, I have the shortest thing that I can do is my 7-minute workout. So a classical old routine from the military, so that you basically use the major part of the muscle, the biggest muscle groups in 7 minutes. Nobody can tell me that you don't have time for 7 minutes, and so 7 minutes, boom, gets you back.
I love how many times in the book I had the feeling that they were such specific and tactical things. You literally list out the movements and the timeline of the 7-minute workout, and you're like, this is so fundamental. It is just such a good, over and over again, I sort of felt through the book, and through your experience in this conversation, just you absolutely have to nail the fundamentals, and it's an ongoing journey to find the ones that work for you and keep them implemented. um,
But
and
we've
that's really
also, I mean, I think people get the impression now that the book is only about the inner game, because that's what we mostly talked about. The book is also it's also about the outer game. These things that
yes.
are typically business books. So it has both of these things. But you're right. I mean, my idea was always to say I want to write it as it is. There are some quite a number of parts in there where I think that people will probably read it twice and say, "Is that really what he has been writing there?" Because it's probably not the most popular way to say it. But I'm not in the popularity contest. I'm in the contest of describing the world as it is, and at least sharing my view on how to deal with it. And some of it is not pleasant. And I wanted it to be as practical as possible, because I realized that when I got into real senior leadership positions, that a lot of the things that came as challenges I was not aware of, and I don't think that anybody had been prepared. And I see this again and again and again, and particularly when you get to the CEO level. Where it's really true. I mean, it is lonely at the top. It can also be highly rewarding, and those two things come together.
That was a fantastic transition. You beat me to it. Let's talk about the outer game, and let's talk about some of with that teaser. What do you think are maybe the most controversial or unpopular, surprising things that you laid out here?
I think that it starts with a fundamental about what is leadership, and I don't know how often when you ask what's leadership all about, very rarely do you see a definition, and as a good German, you always look for a good definition of things, so for me, the best thing is, I mean, to make people do what you want them to do at the time you want them to do it, so. And this is free of any value, So it means that leaders who have that capability can misuse it for bad things, and history has shown this, or you can use it for a lot of good things, So that's that. And then the second question is, what gives leaders these type of capabilities? And the truth is, I mean, it has a lot to do with energy. There we come back, and also with power. What type of power do two people have? And power can come from multiple sources. It can be the power of persuasion. It can also be formal power. So and and that I think people even at business schools rarely talk about. Yeah, some of my friends would say the education there comes closer to educating tree huggers than true leaders. I wouldn't go that far, but in some cases you feel that there is a misconception of people who are coming out of that school. Another fundamental point is that what I've seen again and again and again, people think that they get promoted into a role, they have a bigger office, their name is on the door, and they have a role, and they think now they are a leader. oh man, I mean, if only you knew, because leadership is not assigned, it gets assumed. So I've seen again and again and again that people have been put into leadership functions, but in truth of the matter, they have not been performing as a leader. And I've also seen the opposite, where people did not have the formal role and basically took on this mantle of leadership and became the de facto leader and did some great things, and history is full of examples for both. But those are things that I think should be understood by anybody who's in that kind of business field.
I think those are fantastic, and I agree. There's not aside from maybe one or two books or authors specifically, it feels uncouth almost to talk about power
I
directly.
agree. I agree. Agree.
So what has been is that the thing that you sort of alluded to as maybe an epiphany that you or something that you observed as you rose through the ranks or became senior leadership?
Funny. No, I mean, funny enough, it came to me at a young age, really, really funny. And yes, I was together with friends. I was very young at that time. I think I was probably 14, 15 years old. I grew up in a not very rich neighborhood and in the north of Germany. And we always played together. And we were running a little business by collecting some flowers in the wetlands, and trying to sell them, and we were probably about 10 people or so, and one time there was a situation where we weren't quite sure what that meant for us, and everybody was looking at everybody else, and the eyes were all going on me, and they said, "Well, Klaus, you will have to take the lead here." And neither was I the oldest, nor the longest tenured or the strongest or whatever, and I thought, what the hell is happening here? What has happened here? And we did it, and we were really nicely successful in this endeavor. So that got me thinking, what happened? And in a way, I think what had happened before is that there had been situations before where, even without a discussion, with much less at stake, I had taken the leadership and just, did something that in the end had the team see, this works well. This works well. So, and I've seen this throughout my career again and again and again and again.
Has it changed how you conduct yourself at work, how you lead?
Well, as I have always lived along that principle, and as those who have worked with me know that one of my mantras it has always been, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission. Particularly when you're in large organizations. But I put a but to it, and I said, but if at doubt whether you are putting a hole under the waterline, you have to involve your seniors. You have to involve your seniors. So I expect from you to have the smarts to try stuff out, to try stuff out and be entrepreneurial. And sometimes, don't wait for the last approval to come and go do it. But I expect from you, because you're going to be responsible, that this is a smart decision. That if in doubt that it is not a smart decision, that you seek the advice. Because I don't want a culture of people shooting from the hip. Because that's very often in a very male-dominant environment. That's considered great leadership. Fast decisions. Let's do it fast. I don't want to hear anything. We're gonna do it. Let's do it. You know what? Let's better be sure that we prepared it well. And I'm not saying that we have to have the 100% solution. I'm all for fast decisions, but fast and smart, not fast because of fast. Fast and smart is the thing.
Hmm. One of the other, I don't know if this falls into your, if you think it's going to be contentious or not, but I thought it was so refreshing how you addressed change. in the book. And I'm curious, if you don't mind, I'll read a little excerpt because I'm sure that there's a story behind this, and I want to hear the story or set of things that created this opinion for you. So, how to create change. In simple terms, create a burning platform. To make people act, you need to create a credible set of arguments as to why the only option is change. In my experience, don't just talk about what you want from them. Talk about the outside world that's requiring these changes to be made in the first place so we can all win together.
Yeah. So what's the question?
I think I'm curious what the experiences are that drove that opinion, and whether specifically you create a burning platform even where one might not actually exist.
Well, the latter I would probably, yeah, only do very carefully, But in most cases, there's enough areas where a burning platform exists. I mean, what drove me there is my experience at Siemens from an early time on, where Siemens had, I think when I started, 130 plus different businesses, and quite a number of those were not in the best of shape, So they always had a good set of businesses that were struggling. And I had the a pleasure, really to get to know a lot of them and work in them. And what I was surprised by is that as an outsider, that I looked at it and I thought, well, this needs to change. There's no way this can stay this way. But when I came to see the people who were in the business for a long time, I was surprised that they did not share this, and that led me to one other conclusion and one other mantra of mine, which is if intelligent people look at the same facts, they come to the same conclusion. So the first thing I realized, very often people who are in the business have a very inward-looking tendency. So they are not knowledgeable of what is happening on the competitive side, or what's happening on the customer front, and they somehow assume that life is constant, and they have not realized that there's, for instance, a technological shift, a technological shift that literally attacks the whole industry and will move the whole industry into basically non-existence if one doesn't have a quick answer or an answer to this. So the first thing I would say when I say burning platform, I mean that let's give people these facts. Let them know that in the end you have to have. I mean, what creates good businesses? Good businesses are created only if you have sustainable competitive advantages. So then the question is, okay, you have the word advantage and competitive. Competitive means it's relative to who else they can choose. So you have to look at your competition, and advantage is not defined by you; it's defined by your customer. And there are only two advantages. I mean, one advantage is you offer something cheaper to your customer, or you offer something to your customer that increases the performance of the customer. So it's actually, I mean, in terms of conceptually, it's relatively simple, but it's fascinating how rarely people go through these motions. And very often when people are in certain functions, they don't have access to this data. And then if you have leadership that is not open enough because they are somehow drowning in their own success. That's a classical one. You have a division that's been going very well, and then they basically say, "Oh, we are great, we are heroes, wonderful," and they are not looking. They are not looking, and while they are thinking they are the greatest, somebody else comes around the corner and just beats the crap out of them, and then they wake up way too late. I've seen that. I've seen that more than once. Or people who just don't have the skill set. When you see, for instance, that a business that's very strongly hardware driven gets replaced by software, these are two very different worlds, and they very rarely communicate with each other, and suddenly people realize, my God, I mean, I always thought that you need this hardware, but in reality, this is going to be completely wiped out. We don't need specialized hardware. A normal computer can do it. I mean, the best example of this is this little piece here. If you think about, I once did while working at Alcoa, I once at a management meeting, I put all the devices onto the stage that this little thing has replaced. unbelievable. Unbelievable. The number of devices from typesetters to dictaphones, the amount of that stuff, record players, here, photographs, so this is huge, lexica, all of this gone. Just think about it. My dream when I was little was always that I have an Encyclopedia Britannica. I always thought one day I will be able to afford it. Hell no. What do I need lexica? I now have ChatGPT. I have ChatGPT. That's even better, so because it gets updated every second, so amazing, So this is mainly, and then once you communicate that, you have to make clear to people, hey, look, I mean, there's no way we can stay where we are, and very often you don't know how you're going to get to something else, So in a way, I think the first thing is you have to make them understand not changing is not an option. And we first have to change. We first have to say the past will not be our future and lock it down and say, this is it. Then we have to now go into whatever else we can get our motion on and move into a different direction.
That you alluded to something there that I think you are exceptionally good at. There's a few of these stories in the book of not just speaking about a vision or a customer problem, but demonstrating it the way you did with showing all the devices that the iPhone replaced. There was one that I highlighted like 3 pages straight when you were telling this story, and I would love to have you share it again here. When you took over this downtrodden division at Siemens that had this really sort of ugly view of itself and its work, and it just didn't have purpose, like at the organizational level, and it had a bad track record of leadership, and that was a fantastic display of leadership. I would love to have you share what you did.
Yeah. So I mean, your description of the team there is not correct. It was a great team, and it was a great team, but they had been beaten down by the circumstances, and I get to this. So what this was when I was asked to take over the angiography and X-ray division at Siemens Medical, the headquarters at a small town close to Nuremberg in the north of Bavaria called Forchheim. And the nice thing about this location, it is you have manufacturing, R&D, marketing all in one place, so everybody is there. That's nice. And they were co-located with the computer tomography folks, same building. We used shared facilities. And what had happened is this place, angiography and X-ray, was the birthplace of Siemens Medical, with Mr. Röntgen inventing the X-ray beam and Siemens giving him all the devices for this. So this was history, that has changed all of us and continues to change to benefit all of us, and they had been hugely successful over years, and then somehow this new modalities had come on, computer tomography, then magnetic resonance imaging, ultrasound imaging, all of these new things had come along. And they did 3D images, very cool. And what happened is these folks somehow were pushed into, oh, these are the old guys. They were becoming unprofitable. They had gone through a number of revolvements and didn't get to profitability. I didn't know them very well, but one thing I did before, when Siemens leadership wanted me to take on, I said, well, what I'd like to do is, because I don't know the field well enough, I'd like to go to some customers and spend time with customers. And they say, oh, this is good. And I said, I don't mean to just go there for a few hours. I really want to spend time, kind of like being a doctor or a nurse, being in a hospital, seeing how the equipment is used. And they said, okay, we'll arrange that. And they picked out two hospitals. One was in Munich, the Ludwig Maximilians University Hospital, and the other one was the Cleveland Clinic. So I spent about a week at every place and wearing the white coat of one of the doctors who was out that day, and being there the whole day and seeing what's happening, And I realized that the doctors who were using our equipment were extremely excited because at that time a new thing had come around, which is called minimally invasive treatment, so image-guided treatment, where you can basically put an image, a guide wire into your body, and then go through the blood stream, and go to wherever you want to go, being the heart, being the brain, being at other places, and you do it all through image guidance, so that you know where the guide wire is, and then you do your procedure there, so that was amazing. So you suddenly had a modality that could not only diagnose, but could also treat people. And that was the issue before, some of our equipment was able to diagnose certain things, but then what do you do with the diagnosis if you have no treatment? In this case, we suddenly had something where you could treat and change it, minimally invasive without having to put the person under, It was amazing. So I came back being completely excited and then started my job. And I will never forget, I get into a meeting of the senior leaders and I come into the room and they knew me, but from another role that I had, but one of the people who I was very friendly with in a flippant way, but I think telling what he really felt, he was yelling out when I came in, "Hey, here comes the new guy who's going to run our rusty nuts and bolts business." So, and that was basically how the team was treated. And the rusty nuts and bolts business, everybody's looking down on them. Whoever was good, try to upgrade and go to either the computer tomography or the MRI folks, so that's how they felt. So the team felt really beaten down. So I was thinking on how do I get my excitement into them, So we had I had established a thing called basically an all hands meeting that I did once a month, in the canteen after lunchtime. So I called the university hospital in Munich and said, "Do you have a patient who was treated with our equipment, who I could invite to come over, tell the story?" And it took a week. Then they said, "Hey, here's this young woman, blah, blah, blah. She'd be happy to come over. You can talk to her." I talked to her. She came. I didn't tell anybody, So at the end of the session, I said, "Well, I invited this young lady and I want you to listen to her story." She goes on stage, and I hadn't told anybody else. And they were thinking, what the hell is this? This young woman comes on, and she's talking about herself, that she's a swimmer, that she went to school, was a swimmer, and then all of a sudden had this issue with blood clots, blah, blah, blah. And then got diagnosed with this, had to stop, and then was treated with a minimal invasive procedure so that the blood clots wouldn't get further in her body and would get caught. And obviously this was done with our equipment. So, and in the medical, so there, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, when she told the story, And what happens in the medical industry, because it's highly regulated, you have to, for every step, you have to document who has been working on this. So I also knew which equipment was used for her diagnosis and treatment. And I had given her before the names of the people who had worked on that. So at the end of this, and at the end of this, she pulls this out and says, "I've come here to get to know these people who basically saved my life." And she read the names out and asked them to come on stage, And this is the northern part of Bavaria. These are people who have seen a lot and they are strong, so are not easily emotionally moved, So, but I've seen people being very moved. And they asked me, "Hey, Klaus, can we show her around?" I said, "Yeah, go ahead." That night, I'm sitting back in my office and the head of the labor union sticks his head in, doors open as always, And he comes over and shakes my hand and says, "Klaus, thank you what you did today. You gave us our soul back." you know. And that was the point of they had really forgotten how great they were in doing the things that they could do. And from then, I mean, turnaround was almost inevident. I mean, it's not correct. There were a lot of other people then who did a lot of things, but the spirit was changed because people understood we're doing something that no other modality can do. And we are literally saving lives. And whenever they had a bad day, they were thinking of this young woman who they changed with their own hands, So, and it was fantastic. It was also, I mean, something that I still today are very, very happy about. And today it's a super successful division doing outstanding things that help us all every day.
That's such an incredible story, and I think I took that as so motivating, to just raise my bar of like what it means to really communicate an idea thoroughly to the point where it inspires action in people and changes how they think about themselves and their work. And I thought that story really eloquently tied together, the outer game and the success that you've had as a leader in business, and really motivating a whole group of people with the emotional and spiritual energy of, you know, infusing purpose and meaning in what they do. That we, covered as such an integral part of
And
driving the inner game.
sometimes people would say, "Hey, this was easy because it was a medical field." But we did something similar at Alcoa. We invited an astronaut to talk about what was going through his head in the last moments of the countdown, and thinking of, I mean, there's only this little much of aluminum, that separates you inside of the capsule from the uninhabitable space, and when you know how much dedication to quality has to be there, because even a grain inconsistency can make this thing to blow up, so I think you just have to think hard, how can you instill a purpose back into people, so that they see this is worth. My test is the breakfast test, the Sunday morning breakfast test. What do you say when your children are asking you, "Daddy, we haven't seen you all week, no evening of the week. What happened?" And if you say, "Oh, I've been doing this and this and this," or if you say, "Hey, I've just made sure that our next mission to Mars is going to be absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, and I imagine that's a big part of what infuses, what bridges that work life balance of not feeling like both are trying to tear each other apart, but infuse them together, make them inspire each other and reinforce each other. I know we're getting close to time here, but I just have a few kind of closing questions I want to end with. How do you approach balancing stakeholders? On the work context, you have shareholders, you have employees, you have vendors, you have customers, and there's often trade-offs between those. And in the same way, family, community, husband, father, son.
Yeah. So let's start with the business discussion on that. That's an almost as equally painful one than work-life balance, because that's the discussion about the Chicago school of thought. It was basically say business is all about business. So and portraying this as though it is a contradiction to the stakeholder concept, stakeholder versus shareholder concept. In my view, it in reality is basically it emerges, because in the end, how does a company make sustainable profit? You have to have a great product. You have to have great people to make it. You ideally want to have customers that are very, very happy about it, and pay you well for it. And you have to have a community that wants you. Otherwise, they put in legislation and make your life miserable. So you have to have suppliers that want to work with you. So how on earth, do you think you can be sustainably competitive, if you are not managing all of these relationships? That's it's an illusion, So you have to follow that, and almost all good business leaders do. Yes, I understand that sometimes you see that this has gone too far, and that's another debate. So I think in the end, to be successful, sustaining successful, you have to manage multiple stakeholders, and the focus that you would address is different from time to time. I mean, you have situations where you deal with supply chain shortages, and you have to spend a lot of time on this. You have situations where you have really mad customers, because you didn't deliver a product that was ready yet, so you have to deal with that. You have legislation, which is kind of crazy, potentially coming down on you, where you have to educate the politicians, so this is like, I always thought of it like juggling a number of balls and just trying to make sure that none of it drops, and you don't have to be the juggler alone. That's why you have to have a good team, who juggles with you, and where you can pass the ball on to somebody else, say, "You take care of it now," and just don't drop it, move it on. We didn't talk about top team, that's a really, really important thing, because yes, it's important to be a good leader, but one of the most important part of the leader is to get good talent and to bring them together to work as a team. That is the most important thing for long-time success.
What do you look for in when you are building kind of a team that reports to you?
Well, I mean, I first look at. I believe in the T-shaped leadership model, so to say. I usually look at. I think of a skill profile like general skills, like communication skills, language skills, and that's kind of the horizontal one. But then I look at the legs. I mean, where have they ever shown in their life that they did something that was drilling deep holes, and getting into subject matters? And I want to see that, because to be successful in leadership, you have to have the skills and the lack of fear to sometimes dive very deep and dive deeper and deeper and to get to the bottom of the truth. So if you just have what you see sometimes delivered from MBA schools, just have the general management stuff and not the depth, you are ill prepared for leadership situations. So I've always looked at that, and it's really interesting how much differences you see. And I look at excellence, and then the other thing that I look at is the capability to work together in teams. So I always distinguish, like I mean, my birthplace, soccer is the big thing, and I continue to love soccer, and you can see it in soccer, and you can see it in all group sports. You have a team of stars, and you have a star team. And the team of stars is not necessarily the one that wins the cup. It's typically the star team. And what is the difference? The difference is that even the top players have a capability that they look at the field, and if they see somebody has a better position than them, they pass the ball and bomb, it goes into the goal. That's the star team, and not just a team of stars. And so having great people, but also having people who can work very well together, that's the magic there.
Love that answer. That's fantastic. I have not heard someone refer to the bottom of the truth before, but I love that as a little idiom. I have to get to the bottom of the truth. Um, okay,
Well,
last
what I mean, what I mean with that has probably more depth than you think it has, because as a CEO, very often I've seen that they make a presentation to you, and you don't understand this. You ask questions. I lead with questions because I'm not the expert in many of the fields, but I can become the expert relatively quickly, So I ask questions. I get an answer. I don't understand that. I ask another question. I still don't understand it. And I ask another question. And then people often who didn't know me or don't know me say, "Oh, Klaus, this is complicated." Wow, that's one of the red buttons you better not push, So because then I'd say, well, look, I mean, I have all the time in the world, and I would like to understand this complicated thing. But you know what? We don't have the time. I said, I have all the time. And by the way, I just want to let you know that it is your role to explain it to me, because I am your boss, and I have seen, if you are really an expert in something, you can simplify it and explain it in such a way that almost everybody understands it. So I'd like to hear from you what is really going on there. What is really going on there? And you wouldn't believe how often you see that it's the individual who hasn't understood it. And one other thing that I usually measure in leaders, how that they can look around the corner. I don't
Mhm.
want to have somebody explaining to me why certain things went wrong. I want somebody to explain to me what could go wrong and what actions you are prepared to take and how you could use opportunities. Somebody who knows the business very well understands how to do that. And that's what true excellence looks like.
Love it. I've been taking copious notes. I wish your book was longer. You've got so much wisdom to share,
No.
Klaus. Um, so I think about closing question here, and then I want to have you direct people to the book and anywhere else online. But what is the piece of advice that you have repeated to your daughters the most often?
We. the relationship between father and children is not as such that you constantly are giving advice, so so I think what I think I have learned through parenting is it's not about what you say, it's more about what you do, and there are times when you think they are not listening, but I can tell you they are watching. And they can very well, like in true leadership roles, they can very well distinguish whether what you say is really what you do, whether you put your word where your mouth is, or whether you talk a good game and in truth you are not. You're dealing with it in a different way, your credibility, and I think that's more important for them. I mean, they've seen me in many situations, that uh, not all of them were very pleasant, and I think they've watched, and my impression is they took a lot of good things away, and I'm very happy with them.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for taking the time to do this interview, and thank you for writing this book. I think you've accrued an incredible amount of wisdom, and I appreciate you sharing it in such a straightforward German, no bullshit way, so that we can learn from it, and those of us trying to build great companies and become great leaders can pick these pieces up and run with them. Um, where would you direct people who want to see more from you or learn more about you, follow you online?
Yeah, well, I mean, are you going to put a website link or something in there? So the book is called Leading to Thrive, mastering strategies to successfully lead a sustainable business and life, So, and I would encourage you to take a look and read it. There's a website where you can find it, and you can find the book on almost all places, Amazon being one of those, And
Yep.
it's only available in English, but available in all kinds of shapes and forms.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Klaus. It's a book I'll be revisiting often and gifting to others. And appreciate you again for taking the harrowing writing journey and sharing what you've learned.
Pleasure. Real pleasure.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Eric, for this interview. Thank you.